Hello, everyone, and welcome to our webinar, Pursuing Surrogacy in the United States for Queer Dads in the UK. Apologize, we got a little late start here, but my name is Greg Zola, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer for Gays with Kids. And we have on the webinar with us Brad, who is the founder of Same Love Surrogacy, and Mark, who is the medical director and of Reproductive Medicine Associates of Connecticut, and also the medical director for Gay Parents to Be. And so our topic today will cover what are laws governing surrogacy in the UK and what extra costs are associated with international surrogacy, how much travel is involved, and what other considerations are there for international dads. And for those of you just joining, you can use the Q&A, the chat function or the Q&A function at the top or bottom of your screen to ask questions, which we can answer during the Q&A at the end of the presentation. And if we can't get to your questions, we will follow up with a recording of this webinar. And as well, you can email us at dads@gayswithkids.com. and we'll try to get your questions answered that way. So without further ado, let me pass to Mark Leondires, and he can tell you about the process of surrogacy.
Hello there, everybody. So I'm Mark Leondires, or Dr. Mark Leondires. I'm a reproductive endocrinologist, and what that means in the United States is that I completed medical school, delivered babies for 4 years as an obstetrician gynecologist, and then I did 3 years of subspecialty training to become a reproductive endocrinologist. And I've been helping people have families through the process known as in vitro fertilization, actually for over 20 years at this point in time. The other part of myself that is I'm a dad through surrogacy and egg donation, so I've been on the patient side as well. And at this point in time, greater than 70% of my personal practice as part of a larger practice with 7 doctors includes basically men to be, gay, queer, and bi men to be. So we have an active family building program that's mostly US based, but as an East Coast practice, we do see a lot of Western European folks here, and we're going to talk a little bit more about the process now. So, when I saw this slide, and I want to appreciate the beauty of the slide, it's very simplified here: matching and embryo creation, medical process, and pregnancy. But to have a baby for 2 men to have a baby is basically the most complicated fertility treatment cycle that's really known to humanity at this point in time. So, number one, matching and embryo creation involves basically different segments. The first segment is evaluating the dads to be. The second segment is matching with an egg donor. So you have sperm and egg, the 2 gametes that are come together, and then we are going to make embryos in the IVF laboratory. And then there's a second matching that occurs, which involves matching with a surrogate. And surrogates are these really amazing women who have had children who are willing to carry your baby. So without going into too much detail, in vitro fertilization is over 40 years old. There's over 8 million children born from in vitro fertilization. In the United States, there were over 400,000 IVF cycles done in 2018. So it's a well worked out process. It's not considered experimental. In regards to the medical process, it is also something that is on a daily basis, pretty straightforward. I'm not sure what happened to the slides. In regards to your surrogacy journey, what happens is your surrogate is somebody who is fully evaluated, and meaning criminal background check, financial background check, medical background check, and then she's assessed for transfer of embryos into her uterus. And that matching process is something that is quite rigorous. In fact, if 100 women apply to be a surrogate, usually only about 2 or 3 get accepted. So I'll stop there. Obviously, we can talk more about the IVF process. We'll go to the next slide, which I think Brad is going to take.
Hi, everybody. I'm Brad Spencer. I'm the founder and co-owner of Same Love Surrogacy. We are an egg donor and surrogacy agency located on the West Coast in California and in Oregon. Just like Mark, I am also a father through surrogacy, twin boys that are 7 years old. So I've actually gone through the process as both an intended parent and now as an agency owner for the last 6 years. The first thing I really want to talk about today is the laws in the UK and how they differ from the laws in the United States. The first bullet point you see is altruistic surrogacy. So in the UK, the laws there are a surrogate can't be compensated for carrying your child, for being a surrogate. So that means she's doing it for altruistic reasons. That means she's wanting to do a journey to help attendant parents fulfill their dream of becoming parents. So we see this a lot in the US as well, but in the UK, it's 100% altruistic. A woman really wanting to help out another attendant parent for a variety of reasons. Compensation, surrogacy in the UK, they cannot be compensated, but what they can be is reimbursed for medical expenses. So a surrogate in the UK, if she has OB doctor's appointments, she has any medical bills related to her, any child care, those reimbursements can be paid to the surrogate. She just can't be compensated for the pain and suffering of carrying a child like they can in the United States. So that's a real big difference between the United States and the UK. I'll talk a little bit about some of the other countries, non-US countries currently. There's not many that are doing surrogacy around the world right now. There's still some operations in Thailand. There's still some in India, but that have closed. These are the countries that used to do surrogacy that no longer, it's illegal. There are, Ukraine, Georgia, Mexico, there are countries where you can do surrogacy, but those are the countries that are open right now. I think some of the benefits legally for surrogacy in the US is the laws in the United States have been in place since the 1970s in many states. So we've had 30, 40, 50 years of surrogacy laws that are on the books. In California, where our agency is, it's been since the 1970s. So you really have that safety with surrogacy laws related to the United States. Another benefit of surrogacy in the US is you become parents before the birth. We call this a pre-birth order. And in many states, you and your partner, or if you're a single individual, would become the parents while your surrogate is pregnant. So that's why we call it pre-birth, and all the parental rights are established before the birth. Another benefit in the United States is both attendant parents' names can be on the birth certificate. So that's a big plus for a lot of people, having that birth certificate, especially for same-sex couples, having both attendant parents' names on the birth certificate. So that's some of the benefits of surrogacy legally from surrogacy laws in the United States. Next slide.
So just tagging on to what Brad had to say, my understanding is that except for Canada, the 2 men actually having parentage assigned to them is not either legal or regularly done. So in the United States, there were over 5,000 thawed embryo transfers into surrogates in 2018 alone, and over 50% of those were male intended fathers. In the United States, we do have federal regulations that actually monitor every single in vitro fertilization practice. So we get inspected by the Food and Drug Administration biannually, and that is in order to maintain the protections for intended parents, but it's actually specifically designed to actually protect the surrogate and her risk for being mistreated or infection from the process. It is wholly safe and legal. My understanding for the surrogacy laws in the UK is that an altruistic surrogate, when she delivers, is the legal parent of that child, and then legal action is taken after the fact. And in fact, I'll ask Greg to share the Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority link on surrogacy, where they talk about a lot of the aspects of surrogacy in the UK. I was quite actually surprised to realize that it's actually illegal to even advertise for a surrogate in the UK. And in fact, some of the challenges that you can have in the process come down to the fact that some IVF clinics in the UK, if you're planning on pursuing surrogacy through the United States, they won't even entertain speaking to you. In regards to superior medical outcomes, for lots of different reasons, it is true, as according to the Human Fertility and Embryology Authority and our Centers for Disease Control, that pregnancy rates for IVF in the United States are better than the United Kingdom. So this is also available publicly through our CDC ART reporting and your Human Fertilization and Embryology Authority website. And in 2018, the data for women less than 35 who pursued in vitro fertilization, live birth rates were 32%, versus in the United States it was 44%. So it's a significant difference in that category. And in the UK, there were only 318 surrogacy cycles that I could see in 2018, so it's hard to compare. But in the United States, because there were 5,000 cycles done, these live birth rates are readily available. And in fact, for thawed embryos into a gestational surrogate, as a total group, live birth rates are greater than 50%. So in individual clinics, you'll see individual success rate differences, and certainly, I can share that with you at a consult, or Brad can share with you. Each individual clinic has its own experience in surrogacy. It's interesting for you all to realize that actually not there's about 425 US IVF clinics, and only a small percentage of them do a large amount of surrogacy. In fact, my assessment of the number is only about 20 IVF clinics in the United States do more than 100 transfers into surrogates a year. So it's a relatively, it's a complicated process, and not every IVF clinic in the United States has pursued that process. And that's why it's important to, work with Gays with Kids and understand who are the providers that do a lot of this process, because it is incredibly complicated. In regards to, granting your child dual citizenship, I mean, you have dads on the line here who have gone through this process who are American citizens, but I've taken care of many Western European, Australian, Asian couples, and your legal partner and your partner on the ground in the country that you originate from will work to the process of having your child, who's an American citizen, and you go to the appropriate consulate and get the appropriate documentation so you can emigrate home. And that is unique to every particular country, but you will have a child that is an American citizen and a UK citizen, not an EU citizen anymore, I guess. So I hopefully that provides a nice overview. Certainly we can take some more questions at the end about this.
So next, I'd like to just talk a little bit about the logistics of doing surrogacy abroad here in the US. And a lot of attendant parents will say, how do I stay in touch with my surrogacy team from abroad? There's a 6, 7, 8 hour time difference. And I think what you'll find with agencies, IVF clinics like Mark, that all of us are working at different times. So communication is pretty fluid. We're communicating through WhatsApp. We're doing video calls on WhatsApp, Zoom, Skype. You'll see a lot of clinics working early in the morning with consults or in the evening based on time zone. So it really is a seamless process communicating with your surrogacy team. And your surrogacy team during your journey will always be an agency, an IVF doctor like Mark, and a local US attorney. Those are really the three individuals on your surrogacy team that you need to keep in touch with. Maintaining your relationship with the surrogate is very similar to communicating with the clinic. Usually with European and UK clients, it's on WhatsApp. You're building your relationship. The best surrogacy journeys are where the attendant parents and the surrogate build that relationship naturally. All the relationships build to a natural relationship. So when that big day comes and you become parents, it's very seamless. This person really becomes a family member of yours because you've been working with the surrogate for 15, 18 months during this entire journey. So you really build your relationship, and keeping in touch is very easy through weekly or bi-weekly calls, check-ins with your surrogate. And most of the surrogates are wanting to have that interaction, that relationship with you, that support. And it's very healthy for both the attendant parents abroad, and it's also very important for the surrogate here in the US. Your surrogates are always supported from an agency, but it's also good to have that relationship with your surrogate. Many attendant parents always ask me this question is, how many times do I need to come to the United States? And hopefully we're on the back end of COVID here and we can get back to kind of normal IVF practices. But normally attendant parents from the UK or Europe would come one time to see the clinic. So in this example, you would go to Mark's clinic. He would do an examination of you guys. You would do a sperm donation, a blood work. You'd meet the IVF team. So that's your one donation. We call it FDAs, but as Mark talked about earlier, you're providing your FDAs and your sperm at the clinic. And then really the second time it would be needed is just to come for the delivery of the child. And that's worked out with your agency. And we usually need you to arrive about 2 weeks before the birth. Many UK attendant parents with our agency, they will come during the pregnancy. We usually advise them to come at the 20-week mark, which is what we call the anatomy scan. This is a big ultrasound at the OB doctor where we start seeing hands and fingers in the anatomy. So that usually works for a nice appointment to come and spend some time with the surrogate and attend a couple appointments in person around the anatomy scan at about 18 to 20 weeks into the pregnancy. The next slide, we're going to talk a little bit about costs and extra costs for surrogacy and how it works. Travel costs, like we talked about, the 2 trips. I usually tell attendant parents that the first trip to the IVF clinic is usually over a long weekend, maybe a holiday weekend. You'll spend maybe 4 or 5 hours at the IVF clinic. So, coming to the United States for a long weekend usually works out well for the first travel. And then for the second time, the costs are coming for the delivery, being here with your surrogate, and after the delivery as well. So I usually tell my attendant parents these costs usually range around $5,000 as a good estimate for travel costs. Insurance for the baby, there really is only one insurance carrier in the UK that all the surrogacy agencies use, and that's Allianz. Allianz in Ireland has a newborn option, which will cover the newborn child. This policy needs to be placed before the pregnancy, primarily a week or 2 before the embryo transfer, because this policy needs to be in place for 8 months. So any agency can refer you to Allianz in Ireland. The cost usually is about 7,000 euros, and that will cover the baby that's born in the US. Another question I get a lot of attendant parents ask is how much time off do I need for my stay in the United States? And what we recommend is the 2 weeks before and usually about 3 weeks after the delivery. It does take time in all of these states to secure the birth certificate and then also apply for the US passport. So it's usually 2 weeks before, 3 weeks after for a total of 5 weeks in the United States. Attorneys, the cost for UK attorneys and US attorneys. The nice thing in surrogacy is many attorneys work on flat fee pricing. So you know exactly the prices before you sign up with an attorney. There's no hidden fees. It's very fixed, and you know exactly what you're paying for your parental rights, both in the UK and in the US. So it's no hourly rates, flat fee pricing. Other costs are court fees. Many of these courts that are providing the parental rights, that nominate you as the parents, there's fees for that as well. And any of the US attorneys we work with can refer you to attorneys in the UK. So there is a great partnership between US-based attorneys and attorneys there. So the cost altogether can range between $10,000 or $15,000 for attorney fees, court fees, and parental rights is a good estimate on extra costs for insurance for attorneys. The next slide is really how do you obtain citizenship. And in the US, there's really two ways. We call it pre-birth and post-birth. Most states are pre-birth, meaning that the attorney, your US attorney, will petition the courts here in the United States, the state that your surrogate lives in, and officially have you become parents. So this is done through a pre-birth order. The judge actually officially names you as parents before the surrogate mother delivers. This makes the process very streamlined. So when you arrive, you show up at the delivery hospital, everything's in order. The hospital already has the judgment in place. The hospital already knows you're the attended parents, you're the parents of the child, and you will be banded with the child. You will leave the hospital with the child. So all of this done pre-birth. There are states that do post-birth, and still the end result is the same. Documents are completed beforehand, but the official judgment is post-birth and issued usually 1 to 7 days after the birth. And this process is in some of the states in the US. On the UK side, a little bit like Mark was talking about, citizenship is a little different because the surrogate mother does become the legal parent. So there are additional steps that might be needed. So, speaking with a UK-based attorney, there could be a second adoption that's needed afterwards to remove the mother from the birth certificates in the UK. So it's important to understand your rights using a gestational carrier in the UK. The last thing is what's really the difference between a single versus a married attendant parent. There really isn't much difference for citizenship. The UK will recognize any documents from the US. So single versus married isn't a big difference for citizenship for the baby. What it does make a difference sometimes is the status of the surrogate mother. There are some UK attorneys that believe a single mother makes the process smoother in the UK. So we will match them with a surrogate mother that's single. But there are some attorneys that allow the surrogate to be married. So that's something you'll want to talk to with your UK-based attorney.
Okay, well, Brad and Mark, thank you. For those of you who joined later, we've reached the end of the presentation, but we will take questions. And we have two right now. One is how does a couple who wants to have 2 embryos implanted handle that situation? And Mark will pass that on to you. For those of you that joined late, Mark is the medical director and founder for Reproductive Medicine Associates of Connecticut and Gay Parents to Be, and Brad Spencer is founder for Same Love Surrogacy. Gays with Kids has partnered with the top providers in paths to fatherhood in the United States who have demonstrated, first off, expertise in their fields and the ability to work and effectively and welcoming to LGBT patients and helping them on their journey to fatherhood. So, Mark, why don't you answer that question?
Sure, and welcome to anybody who started late. And I want to apologize for the pounding in the background because turns out the suite below me is having construction done. So I put myself on mute, but obviously I can't talk while I'm on mute. So I'm on the East Coast, right outside of New York City. Brad's outside of LA. So surrogacy already in the United States is a national practice. I have patients all around the United States and actually kind of all around the world. That being said, to answer that specific question, like, can you transfer two embryos? So the transferring two embryos into a surrogate is something we used to do a lot more of, and currently in my office, it represents only about 15 to 20% of intended parents. But, and it's a significant but, none of my intended parents outside the United States have decided to do that. And it's because the insurance burden for a twin pregnancy, because it can be so, it is significantly more complicated and there's a lot more quote unquote left turns it can take. The cost just for the insurance alone for your surrogate is significant if you get pregnant with twins. And then the cost to cover the babies when they are born for the insurance is also significantly higher, because if those babies are born prematurely, as you are probably all aware, in the United States, we don't have a national insurance program. So it's a private insurance program. So if your babies are born at 28 weeks, every day in the neonatal intensive care unit in the United States is about $20,000. And typically 28-week babies are in the nursery for somewhere around 2 to 4 months. So most of my non-US citizens who decide to pursue surrogacy for financial reasons decide to do a single embryo transfer because the risk or the cost burden for the insurance is so large. But is it done? It's done. It is done. It is the minority of transfers that we do, and we do talk significantly to the couples in the U.S. who want to do double embryo transfers about the risk for prematurity, major birth defects, and also developmental delay and other learning disabilities associated with twins that when they were born. Hopefully, if there's any follow-up questions to that, certainly I can speak more. I do see another question that came in that I'll just read off that I can certainly take. It says, what controls do clinics have so we can be absolutely confident that there can't be mix-ups with different sperms or embryos? And obviously, that's a stress for everybody who works with every fertility clinic all around the world. So that chain of custody and control of gametes is something that's essential to actually running any fertility clinic. And the process obviously involves proper labeling of every single specimen. And in my laboratory, every time a gamete is moved or gametes are joined or an embryo is prepared for embryo transfer, 2 sets of eyeballs, so 2 embryologists or laboratory technicians have to verify that and sign to that. And actually what we've done now in 2021, I guess, is we've just brought in a radio frequency ID to every single one of our samples in the laboratory. So now we've added another layer to our identification system that involves an electronic monitor. And actually, in the IVF laboratory, there are certain stages that that now have basically a electronic monitor in it, and every single specimen puts out a signal. And in order to move forward, the embryologist has to basically get a match. So technology is moving into many IVF clinics all across the globe to basically assure that we don't mix up, sperm and egg, which is something none of us ever want to do. And thankfully, it's an exceedingly rare process. While you can find examples of this if you search the internet, if you think about the million IVF cycles done worldwide every year, you basically, it's an exceedingly small number, but it is an anxiety for everybody. I'll let Brad take the second part of this question, and it says, and how long is typically starting a journey to birth? On my side, it takes about 6 months to get everybody ready and make embryos. But on the other side, it can take significantly longer. So Brad, what's your opinion on how long it typically takes?
Yeah, from the time that you start looking and identifying your egg donor to the time you have your embryos is usually 5 to 6 months time. So I agree with Mark on creating the embryos. And then selecting your gestational carrier can take a few months. So it's usually 18 to 19 months from the minute you sign up with an agency and start looking to build your family until you have your child. What we've seen a lot of attendant parents do is you can kind of shorten that a little bit by starting with your egg donation and then also running a little bit parallel with a surrogate, but you always want to make sure you have that egg donor process much more far in advance than you do with the surrogate side. So that's really the time frame and a way you can shorten the time frame, but you really always want to make sure the embryos come first before your gestational carrier goes in for her screening at the IVF clinic.
And I mean, not trying to be, I want to just be realistic here. Not every single transfer results in a live birth. So it might take 2 embryo transfers. Success rates per embryo transfer, at least in my office, for a single embryo transfer, about live birth rate is about 70%. So if I had 100 intended parents using donor egg and a surrogate, 70% of them had a baby in, let's say, that 18-month window, but the remaining 30 had to prepare and do another transfer. So I think everybody should have in their mind, it might be 21 or 24 months to have your child. So that might be my addition to that.
Yep. Yeah.
We have another question from somebody regarding, is it possible to do gender selection with surrogacy?
So the short answer is it is possible to identify embryos that are male or female through a process called embryo biopsy and pre-implantation genetic testing. The role of pre-implantation genetic testing is to actually screen embryos for chromosomal abnormalities that you may be aware of as something called Down syndrome, and actually many miscarriages are missing the proper amount of chromosomes. So PGTA for aneuploidy also reveals the chromosome component, and therefore you will know the gender of any embryo that you plan to transfer, and then you have to decide if you want to do that. Certainly in my office, and I think in most every clinic that does surrogacy that I'm aware of on the GWK website does allow intended fathers to have a preference for gender, but there can be a scenario that you might not get what you want, in that maybe dad A wants to have a girl from his genetics, but there are no female embryos from his genetics. So one of the things you'll learn when you're parents from your 3-year-old is a saying that says you get what you get and you don't get upset. So we can't control what you get, but we will report what you get. And so yes, it's available, and many patients take advantage of that option. It is something that I believe in the UK and throughout most of Europe, knowing gender, even if you're a heterosexual couple, is not legal though. So.
Yeah, and I would also add to what Mark is saying is we do have many UK or European clients that will do the testing, but then advise the IVF doctor to select the highest quality embryo absent of gender. So many times people will do it just for the chromosomal testing and then not want to know the gender and allow the IVF clinic to pick and select the highest quality embryo for transfer.
Okay, thank you, Brad. If there's any further questions that anybody has, please use the Q&A. to ask them. And in the meantime, I wanted to remind everybody that we will be emailing out a recording of the webinar, and you can always email us at gayswithkids.com. And we've relaunched Gays with Kids to accommodate anyone who's trying to choose a path to fatherhood, whether it be surrogacy, adoption, foster, or co-parenting. And so there's a section of the site called Becoming, which we encourage you to explore. And if you want to get in touch with Brad, with Same Love, or with Reproductive Medicine Associates with Mark, their profiles are in that section. We also have an advocacy section about LGBT rights and related to families, and a whole inspirational stories about how people have formed their families. So please do check that out. And if you get discouraged, we know that reading some of those stories will motivate you again. And I think that we may have one more, just a sec. Yes, so another question is, do agencies provide payment schedules, or do you pay everything up front, and how does it work?
No, that's a great question. So with our agency, and I'll speak how our agency works and how other agencies work. So with our agency fee, it's a small deposit to sign on with our agency fee, and it's all performance-based, meaning agency fees are paid when an IVF doctor approves your surrogate and when your lawyers approve your legal contract. So you really want to work with the agency that has this performance-based model when it comes to agency fees. Unfortunately, there are a lot of agencies that are startup, or there are a lot of agencies that haven't been around, and they will make you pay all the agency fee up front. And those are the agencies you want to steer clear a little bit from, because those agencies will make the fee non-refundable, and they may not have a gestational carrier for you that fits your time frame. So you really want to work with someone that has performance-based pricing regarding an agency fee.
Okay, thank you, Brad. We do have a couple more questions. How are you dealing with travel right now, considering COVID restrictions?
So Brad already mentioned this in the beginning. Historically, most of my Western European international couples would make a visit to my office, and they would complete their FDA appointment, which included, a small physical exam, a sperm production for cryopreservation, and usually visiting with the IVF team. With COVID travel restrictions, it has added complexity and added cost. So once again, I apologize for the noise in the background. So so what has happened is that you can't travel to the United States in order to give us your specimen. So we have some particular clinics throughout Western Europe which will do the necessary sperm collection and cryopreservation, and then the federal Food and Drug Administration federally mandated blood work that I need to clear the specimen is drawn in Europe and actually shipped via FedEx to an FDA approved laboratory. Once all that is resulted and we have everything we need, including the physical exam information and an FDA questionnaire, then the specimen is shipped. The burden, and I saw a question come in about what can we have a ballpark cost. The added burden for intended parents has always, from Europe, has always been, well, you have to travel here to give us your specimen. But now it's, you have to produce a specimen, cryopreserve it, and ship it. And it looks like it's somewhere around 5,000 pounds per dad is the numbers that we've kind of worked with to get that specimen to the United States. So that adds, for a couple, would add about 10,000 pounds to your cost. And a ballpark figure that I usually give for surrogacy, so you have your IVF clinic costs, you have compensating your egg donor, you have compensating your surrogate, you have your surrogacy agency costs, your legal costs, your insurance costs, travel, and so on. The number settles in somewhere, around 150 to 200,000 US dollars. And if you bucket that out into two categories, the IVF costs and compensating your donor, her screening, and her travel to the clinic, plus embryo testing usually comes out to about $40,000 to $50,000, and the agency cost kind of is on top of that. And I'll let Brad speak to agency costs. I'm sure he's more aware of the gamut between different surrogacy agencies, but I tell my intended fathers the range is 150 to 200 plus, depending on how you do it and who you move forward with. Brad, do you have a comment on the larger ballpark costs for surrogacy?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I would agree with between 150 and 200,000 is a really safe estimate. Agency fees can be anywhere between $25,000 and $35,000 for a surrogate. Egg donor agency fees usually are between $6,000 and $10,000, depending on the egg donor, the location of the egg donor as well. Like I said before, it's really important to understand that working with an agency that has performance-based pricing, you really just don't want to pay for something up front before you actually have a surrogate profile, because any agency you work with should have about a 3 or 6 month waiting list time for a surrogate. So you want to make sure you're working with an agency that has a waiting list. If surrogacy agency says they have lots of surrogates available, that's a red flag just to be concerned, because any reputable agency should have a waiting list, because there's about 4 to 5 attendant parents for every one surrogate in the United States. So overall cost is, that's a good estimate.
Thank you, Brad and Dr. Leondires. A couple more questions. Should someone be working with only people in the US, or can they work with, say, an egg donor? Can my egg donor be living in the UK, for instance?
I can start with that. Once again, I've mentioned my federal government several times. So the Food and Drug Administration has restrictions on people who can donate anything, whether it be an egg or a liver or an eyeball. And so for ease of use, using a US-based egg donor is so much more efficient. On another layer, occasionally we have people using a non-US egg donors? Yes, we do. And usually in that situation, the egg donor has to be here for a period of time. There are some additional restrictions and hoops to jump through. It will absolutely add to your cost, but it certainly can be done. So can you use a non-US based egg donor? The short answer is usually yes. There may be some particular situations, and certainly with COVID, it's basically no. Certainly with particular situations, it may be harder than you thought or more expensive than you thought.
Thank you, Dr. Leondires. Brad, this is probably a question for you. Who takes care of the citizenship paperwork?
So most of the time it's the agency or the U.S. Attorney that you're working with. Some attorneys provide that service. Some agencies, with Same Love Surrogacy, we assist with the birth certificate and the U.S. passport, because we know all of our attendant parents are very eager to get home, to get back to the UK, to get back to Europe. So with our agency at Same Love, we spearhead that and assist the attendant parents with the birth certificate. I'll talk a little bit about COVID, because I think that kind of dovetails nicely into COVID. Hopefully this won't be around, but if it does, I want people to understand we have received 100% of our attendant parents from the UK and from Europe that have been able to enter the US. So we work locally with US embassies to get what's called a national interest exemption visa that allows you to come for the birth, before the birth. So we've had 100% success rate during COVID last year, having our attendant parents be here for the pregnancy. So any attorney or agency will be able to assist you with travel into the US if we still have these restrictions in place.
Thank you, Brad. If anybody has any more questions, please share them in the Q&A. Here comes one more. Wondering if the surrogacy program allows you to live in the USA with your child or back in the UK. I'm from the UK, but the goal is to have a child. Oh, yeah, we kind of just addressed this before, but maybe we can just reiterate that. But the goal is to have a child and one day be able to immigrate to the US.
Yeah, so I mean, I can talk a little bit about that, and then Mark can add on as well. I mean, what we've found is, I hate to use the word, but they call these anchor babies. But what we've basically found is the child has to become 18 years old before it can sponsor an intended parent to become a path towards citizenship. So there is definitely a long wait period. It is not instant citizenship just because you have a U.S. child. So we want to make that very clear that having a child in the U.S. does not guarantee a path towards citizenship for a parent. Many times that child needs to reach the age of 18, and that person could attempt to sponsor a intended parent that's not a U.S. citizen for a pathship towards U.S. citizenship.
I mean, I don't have really much to add to that because, as evidenced by our recent U.S. history, we can't predict 18 years in the future. So your child will be American citizen, but it's who knows what the future holds in regards to whether you will be able to emigrate to the United States. Hopefully the answer is yes on that for all of you, and we'll see you.
Dr. Leondires, what aspects of the journey do we, and Brad, what aspects of the journey do we have to be stateside for?
On my side, with COVID, I have people that I have never physically had in my office. I have received their essence or their soul or their sperm sample via courier, and everything is done virtually. And I want to further basically tag on to what Brad had to say. With this technology we have, it's actually very straightforward to stay in touch with, whether it be your known donor or absolutely your surrogate and her family. There's usually scheduled conversations and your doctor. And so it's this technology has really been transformational, and with the ease of international intended parents to move forward. So on my side, you never have to come to New York and give us your specimen, as long as we can coordinate appropriate cryopreservation and shipping, and we will do everything else virtually, including your mental health appointments, meeting your egg donor, talking with nursing, and so on. Brad, I know you already mentioned it, but I'll let you kind of tag on to that as well.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely around the birth, an agency like Same Love Surrogacy, we call it a birth plan, and we start talking about the 32nd week of the surrogate journey. And we really want our intended parents to come about 2 to 3 weeks beforehand, attend maybe one of the final OB appointments. So you definitely will need to arrive about at the week 36, 37 weeks gestation. And working with your agency, we'll set up a game plan. We'll set up a plan for you when you come stateside, when you come to the U.S. But it's usually about 2 to 3 weeks before the birth.
And I'll tag on to that. One thing that often is an anxiety for my international parents is, what if you miss the birth? And it happens. And I already mentioned earlier that these surrogates are amazing women and families, and they're going to take care of your baby till you get there. Right? And they don't want your baby. They have their own family. By this point in time, you've spoken to her every week for almost a year. She's part of your family. They're part of your family. So that does sometimes happen. I'm sure Brad can give specific examples of when that's happened, and it's okay. So Brad, I know that's a stress for everybody.
Yeah, that's a great point, Mark. And I think the international intended parents need to understand that, the baby and the surrogate usually stays 1 to 2 days in the hospital after the birth. So there's 36 hours of travel. You can set up guardianship documents where you nominate the surrogate, or you nominate someone from the agency or personal family or friend that you have in the U.S. that can take guardianship of that child until you arrive. So there's many options. Even in COVID with our agency, There was intended parents from China that just could not travel to the U.S., and agency owners at Same Love Surrogacy actually cared for the baby for a week or two before they can arrive from China. So like Mark was saying, the good-heartedness from agency owners, surrogates, family members is always there to support you should you not be able to get here. But setting up a game plan and a birth plan early and having communication with your surrogate is really vital. Asking her how she feels, checking up on the last OB appointment. What does the doctor think you'll deliver? How does the cervix look? How are things? It's good to have that communication, because a surrogate mother is a woman that's had 2 to 4 births of her own, and she's going to tell you, hey, I feel like I'm going to be delivering in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. And, as Mark would say, listening to that surrogate and, listening to when she thinks she's going to deliver and basing your travel on that can really help out, because these women are amazing and can really tell you when they think they're going to be delivering for you.
Kind of segue from that, thank you, Brad, is maybe a question for both of you. The first part is the baby typically delivered naturally or via C-section? And then the second part is what happens if the baby is born early, including with regards to insurance?
2 great questions. We always plan for a vaginal delivery if the surrogate has had vaginal deliveries in the past. All OB doctors want to deliver vaginally. If she's had no C-sections before, there's no reason to have a C-section. The only reason we would have a C-section is if the baby was in distress and we had to have an emergency C-section, or the baby was breech and we could not deliver vaginally. Those would be the only reason. But the OB and the surrogates all want to try vaginal deliveries as possible. Regarding insurance and premature birth, the Allianz insurance, which I talked about earlier, would cover any medical costs for premature birth. So that insurance in place will pay for medical costs should the babies come early. Like Mark talked about, NICU expenses are very expensive. So you want to have a policy in place should the baby come prematurely. But I'll give you some numbers. Over 90% of our surrogates that are having singletons deliver full term. And the reason is the safeguards that me and Mark put in place is we're only allowing surrogates that have delivered full term. We'll never take a surrogate in our program. Mark would never clear a surrogate that's had premature birth. So you're really seeing only surrogates that have had full term deliveries at 39, 40 weeks. And the numbers show that a woman that's had births at 39 and 40 primarily will have a full-term delivery. So that kind of risk is taken out of the equation because we're only presenting surrogates with full-term, non-complicated pregnancies.
And Brad, another question is, what percentage of surrogates make it through the screening process?
For us, it's between 2 to 3%. We're very stringent in our due diligence on our surrogates. So very few make it into our program because we just don't want to take any risks for the attendant parents, for the surrogate. So it's very few. Most agencies are taking anywhere between 2 to 5% of the surrogates that apply.
So dovetailing on that, remember your surrogate can fail screening for any number of reasons. And some of those are medical, some of those are social, some of those are that they change their mind. And so I think I mentioned at the beginning, if 100 women who've had babies apply to be a surrogate, about 2 to 3 end up actually, as part of the pool. And that's why there's, a waiting list usually at pretty much every agency for a surrogate. And it's a relationship. So I tell all my intended parents, if you meet your surrogate, even if you've been waiting 3 or 4 months for her and her family, if you don't feel like this is going to work out and you don't feel like you're going to be able to build trust, wait for the next one, because you're already at the top of the list. The next one will pop up. This is a relationship, and it's not a transaction, and it's really amazing and special.
Yeah, and I would just add on one other thing to what Mark said, which I think is great, is waiting for that special connection, because many international attendant parents, they want to do a sibling journey. They want to have a second child. So having that strong relationship builds the opportunity to use your same surrogate for a sibling journey. And we see that in our agency, over 90% of our surrogates that have a non-complicated, smooth journey with their attendant parents 6, 9, 12 months later, they'll end up doing the sibling journey for the same intended parent. So you do want to build that trust and that relationship with your surrogate, because she could end up carrying your second child as well.
Okay, thank you, Brad, and thank you, Mark. We are going to wrap up this webinar on pursuing surrogacy for men in the UK. And we, as I mentioned, will be sending links to both providers' profiles in the follow-up email, as well as a recording. Don't hesitate to email dads@gayswithkids.com for any further questions that we didn't get a chance to answer. And we thank you all. Thank you to the presenters for sharing your expertise and insights. And thank you all for attending. And best of luck on your journey to fatherhood. Bye-bye.